dona do lar, eu sou dona de mim.
Se eu nasci pra casar, não, eu nasci pra brilhar.
Este é o lembrete de L'Oréal Paris para que você nunca se esqueça do seu próprio valor. Porque a sua história é valiosa. Porque você vale muito.
Hey everyone, in the next episode, we're going to do a couple things. One, we'll be telling you who the next person we're talking about is. Who is our next deviant? What is our next series? Two, we're going to be handling some of the loose ends we didn't get to in the main story here for Anthony Sowell. We'll be picking up some odds and ends and answering your questions too. So if you have any questions or comments that you want us to tackle, there's a couple places you can leave those for us. One, check out our Patreon, deviantpodcast.com. That's a great place to leave it. Also, you can let us know your questions and comments in our Discord too, which you can access once you join. Two, leave a comment on our socials at deviant.podcast on TikTok and Instagram. You can interact with us there. Three, leave something in the comments section wherever you're listening to this. If there is a comment section, to leave a comment or a question. We'll be keeping an eye on those and we'll answer your questions in the next episode. As far as this episode goes, just like the last couple episodes, there is some strong language ahead, and there are scenes that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Let me tell you about looking into his eyes. I looked into his eyes. He had these little beanie eyes, and I couldn't see nothing. It looked like he was staring straight through me every time I ever looked at him. It was something about him, but I just couldn't put my hand on it. But if I ever see that look again, I know who that person is. That was evil, demon, devil, Anthony Sowell.
Tell me about the girl.
Y'all got my hair fucked up.
Your hair was fucked up long before we got
okay, well, and it's still fucked up.
Right.
Fucked up more.
Right. You got 6 dead girls in your place.
Okay.
You punished them by choking them.
Okay.
Because they conned you. Or tried to con you.
Okay.
And at this point in time, you're not standing up to do the honorable, righteous thing.
Okay.
Or are you? Or when? Or what? Are you gonna do it later?
Okay.
You gonna decide to do it later?
Okay. Whatever you say.
What you say?
Whatever you say. It make no difference what I say.
What I say?
I'm tired of y'all confusing me.
We confuse you?
Yeah. Go away.
Well, give me straight talking. We'll stay on one subject.
When you talk about that.
You confuse us.
No,
give us some straight talk.
I tried to.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
It's easy to get frustrated. Anthony Sowell is not playing ball with detectives Mel Smith and Lemmy Griffin.
He's talking in circles. He remembers this, doesn't remember that. He gets irritated with their questioning.
At this point in our series about Anthony Sowell, it's clear that he should have been in a police interrogation room answering for his crimes long before this.
Yes, this is a story of red flags, missed signs, astounding incompetence.
But also, yes, the story is that Anthony Sowell is the killer, and these are his crimes.
And now, as these two stories collide in a courtroom and in the media, it's time to see if this whole mess can resolve into something Sowell's victims never got from anyone. It's time for justice.
We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside all of society's boundaries. From cold open media, this is Deviant, Anthony Sowell, Part 5. Welcome back to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what humans are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden.
And I'm Dan Simitovich. Thanks again for being here. On December 1st, 2009, police interrogations of Anthony Sowell, they're over. Detectives Mel Smith and Lemmy Griffin, they tried for hours to squeeze any kind of confession out of him. Lots of hours, no luck. What Sowell gives is a sort of half-baked, vague picture. He talks about hearing voices and seeing bad things happening like it's all in a dream. He never identifies the women found in his house and buried in the backyard.
But on the first day of December 2009, a month after police first walk into the house and discover what was inside, the justice system gets to work. A Cuyahoga County grand jury hands down an indictment. 85 counts. 66 of those involve the 11 women he murders. The remaining 18 charges encompass the survivors of his attacks: the woman who fell out of the third-floor window, Latundra Billups, and Gladys Wade.
So as a law clerk, you are basically a gopher. You do whatever the attorneys on the case need you to do.
This is when Chris Schroeder steps in. Back then, he's with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. He works on the prosecution of Anthony Sowell for the duration. As you just heard, he begins as a law clerk on the case. Eventually, though, in the appeal phase, he's leading the prosecution.
In this case, that consisted of a lot of organization because there was so much paper in this case. There were so many exhibits. There was so much evidence to keep straight. That was a lot of what I did for the year and a half that I was a law clerk on this case. It was a lot of organizing. There were also parts where I had to review his statement, and I watched that statement dozens of times. I feel like I know it like the back of my hand. I could quote it to you almost chapter and verse. This was a very, very evidence-intensive case.
Sowell's trial begins in June of 2011. It's almost 2 years after he's captured. Before opening statements happen, the 12 members of the jury actually visit the home on Imperial Avenue. They put on masks and shoe covers and take that horrible tour.
They walk all 3 floors of the house. They see the basement, they see the crawl space, and they see the yard. And they see the front room of the 3rd floor, the same room Anthony Sowell's alleged voices tell him to stay out of. And then the trial gets underway. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and the defense doesn't have a lot to work with.
So his defense in the first phase was to try to poke holes in the investigation. You know, nobody had ever processed a crime scene like this before, and there's understandable mistakes that get made. Here's a photograph of an officer standing in the backyard not wearing the plastic booties that he's supposed to wear. Okay, fair enough, but what does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? There were a lot of little things like that the defense tried to pool together and say, this is a sufficiently shoddy investigation that you can't be confident that there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the prosecution is correct in how they say that this happened. Stuff like that. Nothing really very persuasive. It was a pretty overwhelming case in the first phase. I think it was an 11-week trial. The lead prosecutor on the case was a guy named Rick Bombick, and he had retired very shortly after this trial. He kind of stayed on just to do this one case, and then he retired. The second chair prosecutor was a woman named Pinky Carr, who was elected judge right after this trial happened. I never really had a doubt that we were going to get a guilty verdict on nearly all of the counts. It's a tough case as a defense attorney to try. Overwhelming evidence, 11 homicide victims, and a very unsympathetic defendant. I never really had a doubt.
Trying to poke those holes in the prosecution, or looking for a technicality as a way to get a not guilty verdict for Anthony Sowell, doesn't work. On July 22nd, 2009, the jury finds Sowell guilty of the murder of all 11 women and more than 70 other charges.
But the jury still has more to do. Now they have to hand down a punishment.
It was a pretty overwhelming case in the first phase, and I think everybody knew that he was going to be found guilty and that we would go on to a second phase where the jury would have to choose between the death penalty and life in prison. And that's really where the defense focused a lot of their efforts.
And now we move into a phase where the defense's sole mission is to save Anthony Sowell's life.
O tráfico, a milícia, a polícia e, no meio disso tudo, as pessoas da Cidade de Deus. Assista a nova série da Max, perfeita para você que ama um podcast de crime. Cidade de Deus, a luta não para. Produzida por Fernando Meirelles, com estreia dia 25 de agosto. Uma história de resistência na favela. Com Roberta Rodrigues, Marcos Palmeira, Alexandre Rodrigues, Andréia Horta e grande elenco. Saiba mais em max.com.
Uma pausa nesse episódio para dicas de como se portar durante as férias.
Não pode dar bandeira. A gente não pode mostrar estresse e nem medo.
Ah, esqueci de mencionar que essas dicas devem ser seguidas somente pela família Dawson.
Eles vão matar a gente. A gente tem que ir embora agora.
Não Fale o Mal, um suspense psicológico com atuação fascinante de James McAvoy.
Ou você é o predador, ou é a presa.
12 de setembro nos cinemas. Verifique a classificação indicativa.
The 12 jurors picked to decide Anthony Sowell's fate have a tough task. They've already convicted him of 11 counts of murder. But the second phase of the state of Ohio versus Anthony Sowell is to decide whether he lives or dies.
The second phase is the defense's opportunity to present the jury with any reason at all, why this person shouldn't be sentenced to death. It doesn't even have to be related to the crimes. It can just be anything about their history, character, or background.
Here's how this works in Ohio. Obviously, a judge is listening to all this too, so if a jury recommends the death penalty, the judge can overturn that decision and sentence Sowell to life if he so chooses. But if the jury recommends a life sentence, the law says that the judge must go with that. So the defense does everything they can to make their clients look human. In Sowell's case, they go with this sort of kitchen sink strategy. They throw everything.
And they called 24 witnesses during the second phase of this trial. It was the most witnesses I've ever seen or heard of being called in a death penalty trial in the sentencing phase. They called people to testify about his military records. They called people to testify about his employment history. People to testify that he shoveled snow for them in the neighborhood, that he was a nice guy. People who knew him from prison, who testified that he had a good behavior record as an inmate. They called his sister. They called various family members to explain that his dad wasn't in his life. They called one of his childhood teachers who talked about him being a good student and a good kid. You're trying to reconstruct as much of his life as you possibly can to humanize him for the jury, because if the jury sees him as a fellow human being, it's harder for them to recommend the death penalty.
Of course, the prosecution gets their turn too. In this case, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, that they can bring to the table. They have the horrific details of these crimes. They have statements from family members. But what really overwhelms here is what surviving victims have to say.
The moment that I remember the most is Vanessa Gay's testimony.
Vanessa Gay. You haven't heard her name yet. In September of 2008, over a year before the discovery of Sowell's 11 victims, Vanessa is lured to Sowell's home.
Her story, like the other victims we've heard about, is one of trauma and survival. You're about to hear the testimony she gives in the penalty phase, when jurors are trying to figure out whether or not to sentence Anthony Sowell to death.
I knew that was coming because I had listened to her statement, and she said the same thing. But I remember just the tension in the courtroom being unbearable. Like knowing that that was coming, that this horrible thing is about to come out, and everyone in the courtroom is going to hear it, and they'll never be able to unhear it.
It's an intense piece of audio we're about to hear. But we think it's important that her voice is heard.
All I could do was pray and agree with, try and keep calm and agree with what he said. Just do everything he said. He kept telling me, I will throw you in a closet for 3 days. He told me for 3 days and forget about you. And I'm just thinking, this is how it's going to end. You know, this is how it's going to end when I did what he said.
How long has this taken place, this ordeal that you're speaking of?
When the rape stopped, it was getting light outside, so it had to be early in the morning.
Okay, so several hours had gone by?
Yes. I finally got up the nerve to ask him, could I use the bathroom?
What was his reaction to that?
After a few minutes, he told me I could.
So did you leave the bedroom?
Yes.
And as you left the bedroom, the bathroom would be on the same side of the hallway, right?
Yes.
As you walked to the bathroom, did you notice anything about the room on the left?
The plastic was pulled up. I saw something on the floor. It looked like it was a body, and it had no hand on it.
I need you to describe in detail, Ms. Gay, what you saw there.
The plastic was pulled up and out the corner of my. As I'm walking, I look, and it was propped up, sitting on the floor, and it was taped up, and there was no hand on it.
Did you use the bathroom?
Yes.
Was he nearby when you used the bathroom?
I think it was outside the door. I don't know. I just know. I kept thinking to myself, this is not possible. This is not real. You know, I'm thinking I done cried too much, but I see what I saw.
At some point during the attack, he lets her use the bathroom. And as she's walking to the bathroom down the hallway, she sees a headless body propped up against a wall in the third floor of his house. And one of the victims, LaShonda Long, all we ever found of her was her skull. And I just remember feeling like the temperature in the courtroom had been turned up to 120 degrees and just wanting to get through that as soon as possible to get it over with because it's just so awful.
This isn't the end of Vanessa's story. What happens next would surprise you if this happens in a system that actually works. But you know this story by now. You won't be surprised.
I'm trying to call the police. Well, not trying. I called the police. They told me I had to come in and make a report. Come in. I can't even. How do I get there? Come in and make a report. You can't take a report over the phone.
How'd you feel about going to the police?
I felt less than a human because I already had a bad experience. They already harassed you. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know. I felt horrible about going to the police.
Say, because you already had a prior bad experience?
Yes.
Did you have a lot of confidence in the police?
I had none at all. None. They failed me before. They failed me. They didn't help me. So what make them think they're gonna come again? They didn't help me.
She called, but she was told that she had to come into the sex crimes unit to do an interview in person because Cleveland Police sex crimes at the time did not have cell phones and they did not have emails.
Let's hit pause here real quick. At the time, they didn't have cell phones or emails. At the time was 2008. It's nuts.
So there's no way to get a hold of these people other than to actually walk into the sex crimes unit and knock on the door and see if someone's there to talk to them. And this is something people don't want to talk about, right? It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. You don't want to go into the police department if you don't have to. So they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have email. There's no way to get a hold of them. So she calls in because she wants to report this. And she's told, you got to come in and give a statement. Well, she doesn't want to do that for a variety of reasons that are personal to her. She doesn't do that. She goes and she sleeps the night in an abandoned house, crying herself to sleep. And it doesn't come out until after he's arrested where she comes forward and tells the story.
The story of Vanessa Gay is yet another example of a system built to miss. She's a victim that shouldn't have been a victim. If police take Gladys Wade seriously, just a couple months earlier, Sowell is off the street and Vanessa never walks into that house. On August 8th, 2011, in an attempt to save his own life, Anthony Sowell stands up from the defense table to say his piece.
Thank you, everyone. You may be seated. We're back on the record in case 530-885, Stable House versus Anthony Sowell. We have Mr. Sowell on the witness stand at this time, ladies and gentlemen. He is going to give what is called an unsworn statement. It is his right to do so in this type of proceeding. So at this time, Mr. Parker, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Anthony.
Good afternoon.
I need you to keep your voice up so all the jurors can hear you. Let's just start by having you give the jury your full name.
Anthony Edward Sowell.
For nearly 33 minutes, Anthony Sowell tells his version of the story. He talks about his family life.
Did you get to a point, Anthony, where you wanted to get out of that house?
Yes.
Why did you want to get out of that house?
I just want to escape.
Explain that as best you can.
Just constant yelling and screaming. I mean, they argued over money. They argued over the kids getting treated different. It was just constant. All day. All day was yelling at the kids. There was always something going on.
His time in the Marine Corps.
Why didn't you join the Army?
Because I heard the Marines were tougher.
Why did you want to go to the tough?
Because I had a point to prove.
What are you going to prove?
That I can do it. That I was constantly called, put down and stuff, so.
His time in prison.
Now, after you left the Marines, you were arrested on a very serious case, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you pled guilty to attempted rape, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then you went to prison for that.
Yes.
At the end of his testimony, he finally addresses the victims he left alive and the families of those he killed.
Anthony, you know why you're here, obviously.
Correct.
Is there anything you want to say to families of victims in this case?
Well, the only thing I want to say is that I'm sorry. I know that might not sound like much, but I truly am sorry from the bottom of my heart. This is not typical of me. I don't know what happened. I can't explain it. But I know it's not a lot, but that's all I can give you.
He can't explain it. That's all he can give them. This is the closest he ever gets to taking any kind of responsibility. And on August 10th, 2011, the jury, by a vote of 12-0, recommends a sentence of death for Anthony Sowell. Officially, it's 11 individual death sentences, one for each victim.
I remember just feeling sad because in the justice system, you're never talking prospectively, you're always looking retrospectively, and we're just looking back over the human tragedy that unfolded in this case. There are so many places along the way where he could have been stopped, where he could have been arrested before 11 people were killed and 5 women at least were raped. And by the time it gets to trial, all that's already happened. We're talking about things that have happened in the past, and there's no way to feel good about it. You just sort of feel sad.
If you're fascinated by UFOs, aliens, ghosts, demons, cryptid creatures like Bigfoot, Chupacabra, and Mothman, then I have the show for you. The Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader. Each week, we investigate different claims of the supernatural and try to shed light into the darkness, bringing you the top guests and experts from around the world. Enter the fray. Then join me, Dave Schrader, your host, as we investigate all aspects and claims of the supernatural and paranormal. Listen on all of your favorite podcast platforms: Good Pods, TuneIn, Pocket Casts, Deezer, Player FM, Amazon Music, Audible, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. The answers to life's biggest questions and miracles and mysteries awaits you. So join me each week, 2 brand new episodes of the best in paranormal podcasting, The Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader.
If this series on Anthony Sowell is the first time you're hearing about him, you may be wondering why. You know the details. Why wasn't this a huge national story? Why isn't his name up there in the True Crime Hall of Infamy, along with Ted Bundy, BTK, and Israel Keys?
By coincidence, this trial happened at the same time as the Casey Anthony trial in Florida in the summer of 2011. And you look at the amount of attention that trial got and the amount of attention that this trial got and how many people remember Casey Anthony. Just by me saying that name, you can picture her in your mind. You know what she was accused of. You know what happened in that case, right? How many people today could name a single one of Anthony Sowell's victims? Not very many, unless you knew one of them, right? Or you've looked at this case extensively. This case is about what happens when we as a society just decide that we don't care. I had people coming up to me during this trial and asking me if I'd been watching the Casey Anthony trial. No, I haven't. I'm kind of busy right now, guys. I'll catch up with that later. You know, we as a society pick which cases we care about, we pick which crimes we care about, we pick whose lives matter and whose lives don't. And in this case, we picked the people whose lives didn't matter, and we picked the same people that Anthony Sowell did. And this case is about what can happen when that is allowed to fester over a long period of time, when people aren't looking and they don't find what they're not looking for.
You've now heard the story of Anthony Sowell, his victims on Imperial Avenue, the system that allowed him to thrive. But is that the whole story? Are there other victims we don't know about? Chris Schroeder thinks so.
Do we have now a full picture of Anthony Sowell's homicidal activity?
I could virtually guarantee you that we do not. Nobody ever dug up that home on Page Avenue where he grew up and where he was dealing crack from in the 80s. We asked several times. No one ever dug up the backyard. No one ever dug up the walls. No one ever did a scan of that place. Nobody ever ran a cadaver dog through it. I have no idea if that house even still exists. It may well have been torn down in the 15 years since then, but we don't know what happened there. And the victims we found are the ones on his property, in his house and in his backyard. There's a lot of other unsolved homicides from that neighborhood that are consistent with this, but I can virtually guarantee you we do not have a complete understanding of everything that he did. And now that he's dead, we never will.
Don Laster still lives in the neighborhood, in Mount Pleasant. All these years after he helped rescue one of Sowell's victims, he still thinks about it.
Everybody was amazed that it had went so far. 11 people. And then they started saying, well, that's probably what happened to all the rest of them. It's other serial killers. And it was. It's been a couple more serial killers in Cleveland. So they had to stop putting it on the hospitals kidnapping people to steal organs when these ladies someone was ladies of the night, and was selling sex, and they was being taken advantage of. That's one of the oldest hustles in the world, and still you don't deserve to be killed about it, but people still haven't healed over that. And I know most of the victims' children still haven't healed. They miss their mom. And a lot of people have been on drugs, have gotten off of drugs and became very important citizens in the community to help people. And some of these women was just probably going through bad times, and they probably could have got off.
I'd like to say something on a broader level, because I think it's more than just this case.
Here's Zach Reed again. In 2009, he's the Cleveland City Councilman representing Mount Pleasant.
When you look at the amount of missing women that are poor Black women that go missing in this nation, and because of their income and their demographics, we just don't take it serious. We just don't. Not just in Cleveland. I guarantee you went around the nation and you went into certain neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, neighborhoods of color, and you talk to individuals, people who've gone missing, they tell you the same story. It won't be a different story. The first thing that these individuals do is look at their demographics, their economic situation. That's someone's daughter. That's someone's daughter, someone's mom, that's someone's aunt, someone who loved somebody. And if it was your daughter or your sister or your aunt, you would want them back home. That's the only thing we should be looking at. Yes, they may have taken drugs. Yes, they may be runaways, but they are human beings who are loved by somebody. And therefore, it is our responsibility as public officials, as law enforcement, and as public servants to do all that we possibly can to reunite them back to their families. And we should not be looking at anything else but what can we do to reunite them back to their families. Let's be clear. We didn't do all we can do. I told you about my friend that saved the naked woman from the house. I mean, if you see a naked woman coming from the house, you think that then you go talk to Sowell, you go talk to the other people, and you still let the man go about his own business. Naked women don't come climbing out of a house. And as a law enforcement person, I would think that you would say something strange here. There's a naked woman who says, I came out that house over there, and you come back to that house and you investigate it, but it's dead and you believe him and you just keep going. Well, like I said, you cannot make me believe that if that would have been a different demographic in a different community, a different income bracket, that a lot more would not have been done.
And now, as we wrap up our story of Anthony Sowell, you may be wondering, did he ever actually confess to this? As we mentioned earlier, he doesn't go all the way. He doesn't say, yes, I did this. I'm the man who killed these 11 women. But he does come close. He comes very close. And what you're about to hear sounds a lot like a confession to us.
You lived at 12205 Imperial on the 3rd floor, correct? Okay. We found 4 bodies on the 3rd floor next to your bedroom, which is your residence, correct? We found 1 body in the basement underneath the steps, correct? And 1 body outside in your rear yard, correct? And what you're telling us is that
these girls that came there, something they did wrong that ticked you off.
Something happened.
Something happened.
They conned you or tried to con you.
And you're saying that they conned you or tried to con you, and that pissed you off. Am I correct?
That's
I want to be
mind,
correct.
yes.
That's what comes to mind.
Yes.
And you're saying that these dreams keep reoccurring with you somewhat visualizing that you're doing something wrong to these girls with your hands. Correct? But you don't go
that I choked somebody.
That you choked someone with your hands. Okay? And you're saying these 6 girls are the people that you choked with your hands.
That's all I can think.
That's all you can think.
4 months after the trial of Anthony Sowell, the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue is torn down. It's a real-life erasing of a story that's a stain on the city of Cleveland and its collective psyche. And now, in 2024, that property at 12205 Imperial Avenue is a neighborhood park known as the Garden of 11 Angels. It's a chance to move Mount Pleasant and Cleveland forward. Erasing the story is one thing. Learning the lesson of that story is another thing entirely.
Remember Terry Gilbert from a couple of episodes ago? He's the attorney who led the lawsuit against the Cleveland Police Department in their horrendous mishandling of the Gladys Wade case.
I hope that this case did something in terms of changing the culture there about investigate. Everybody is entitled to be protected. I don't care if you're a homeless person or a drug addict or a white-collar alleged embezzler. You have to be serious about all of them, and particularly people who are marginalized and having their own difficulties with life. And to treat them differently than others is wrong, and it shouldn't ever happen.
I would hope that it has taught us that we got to do all we possibly can. When someone says their loved one is missing, we have the ability, we have the technology, we have the manpower, we have the ability to do all we possibly can to work to see that that loved one that has gone missing comes back to their family. And I hope that because of Sowell, that the city of Cleveland is doing a much better job than they did during this tenure.
Anthony Sowell never sees the inside of a death chamber. In 2021, he dies in prison from an undisclosed illness.
Him dying is the only thing that can ever really provide closure to the story. I always tell victims when I meet with them that as prosecutors, we can't provide closure. That's not something that we do. Closure has to come from within. What we do is provide an accounting as best we can, as much as we can, of what happened to your loved one in this case. Him dying was the only thing that could ever bring closure to any of these people. A guilty verdict wasn't going to do that. A death sentence wasn't going to do that. So when he died of natural causes, I was relieved for them that it was finally over, that they weren't having to go through this anymore. In some ways, you feel like he kind of got off easy because his victims didn't get to die on natural causes on their own terms. He took that away from them. You know, they may have not been living the lives that you would choose for yourself or for your children, but they were their lives, and he did not have any right to take that from them. And the reality is that despite doing that, he got to die of natural causes and they didn't. And there's a kind of feeling that maybe he got off easy there.
Give us some straight talk.
I tried to.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
I tried to, where everything came from, all that kind of stuff.
The hell with them girls, huh? Who cares? Who cares about
No, I ain't told you
That's
nothing.
probably how you felt in the first place.
Okay.
Who cares about them girls?
All right.
Because you obviously don't care about them now. We started off this conversation one man to another. I ain't sure how it's ended. I know one man is in here. Is there another one? You stand up, be a man. Now you're gonna climb up like a little boy, right? Your mama taught you that? You're humming to drown me out? You don't want to hear from me no more? Maybe these girls wasn't that innocent, but their mamas need to know where they are. Your sister will have the privilege of knowing where you are. Your daughter will have the privilege of knowing where you are. But their mamas and daddies don't deserve that, right?
Sure.
But if you feel that way, give it to us.
No.
So now it's a no.
No, because I tried to, but ain't nothing good enough for you. You keep saying that all you want.
I got to keep
but I'm trying to give you as much as I
Don't
can.
get upset with me because
I have to because it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I did rack my brain.
We all frustrated.
And stuff come. I told you I would give you my word. I tell you.
I think you remember what you want to.
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, we started off as men. We didn't end this as men.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
As we've mentioned before, we made multiple efforts to reach out to the Cleveland Police Department for comment, for an interview, for anything. Those efforts were never answered. Next time on Deviant.
Dan and I will talk more about the Sowell case in our off-script episode. Talk about some of the work that went into the production of this series, some of our outstanding questions, and hear more from the people we talked to in this story, and answer your questions and share your comments. If you want to add your thoughts to the mix, there's a couple ways to do it. Leave comments on our socials, deviant.podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and join our Patreon by visiting deviantpodcast.com, or leave a comment or review on whichever platform you're listening to this. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and until then, thanks for listening.
Deviant is written, produced, and executive produced by Clark Goldband, Andrew Iden, and myself, Dan Semitovich. Editorial and production support comes from Jenny Ament, with original scoring by the incomparable Shuvo Sur. Marketing, sales, and distribution support come from our partners at Gemini 13, and Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.